Keith Wilberg is Westport's town engineer. He's responsible for directing, planning, supervising, coordinating all the engineering, construction, and maintenance of activities across all town departments and much more. It is a fascinating and probably little appreciated job. I would like to know more. I'm sure our podcast viewers would too. So Keith, welcome to the Westport Library stage.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So some of my best friends are engineers.
My condolences.
and they knew from a very early age that that's what they wanted to do when they were, taking apart things and taking apart their parents' stereos and all that. Was that you? Did you always knew from an early age?
Maybe to some degree, yeah. I was always very, very good at math. And if I didn't become an engineer, I probably would have become a PhD and taught math. But I wanted to get out of school and have a life and make money. My father was a mechanical engineer, and that definitely swayed my my choices. But when I went to the University of Connecticut, I was going to be a mechanical engineer and a civil engineer. Oh. But when I took thermodynamics versus civil engineering was rocks and dirt and steel and wood. And I was like, Dad, I'm not going to go your way. I'm going to go my way. But it was the math that carried me through. So,
your way or the highway.
So exactly.
So how did you end up in Westport?
It's a long story. I worked for a long time in Greenwich with a company that did most of their work in Greenwich and Stamford. Bounced around a lot at some different places. 2008 happened, and a whole lot of people got redefined, shall we say, including me. And then I ended up in Westport in 2014. Responded to an ad for, they needed someone in the engineering department. So that's the short story. There's a very long story, but
excuse me. I talked. Excuse me. Yeah. I talked in the intro about all the things you do. What really does a town engineer do? Oh,
that's a good question. Our department is a small department, but we do an awful, we kind of like wear a lot of hats and do a lot of things. The engineering division, of which I'm part of in Public Works does a lot. It includes the dump, it includes the highway department, it includes a lot of things. The engineering division, we tend to focus more on things that need engineers, surveyors, and that would include anything having to do within the town right-of-way, which is the property line out in front of people's houses where the road is. So things having to do with roads is a big part of what we do. Now, that includes roadway geometry and stop signs and how things are. It includes drainage. That includes sidewalks along the side of the roads. A lot of things, kind of what I would call road-ish.
Trees?
So trees become a big thing, certainly. In our department in engineering as well, we have a construction engineer inspector, Rafael Ramos, and boy, that guy, he's a construction guru if there ever was one. He knows how to build just about anything, and he goes around and checks anything being built for the town in terms, from anything from sidewalks to roads and you name it. He also, in the field, runs our paving program every year. Brian Thompson is in that office, and he is our sewer guru. Probably about a quarter of Westport is on sewer. The rest of it is on septic systems. And so anything that comes out of the house from sewage in sewage pipes goes into sewage mains. It's sewage utility, basically, and ultimately ends up in the sewage treatment plant on a lane road. That's Brian's kind of domain there. We have two guys that take care of nothing but the technical reviews of all development in planning and zoning, grading, heights, all kinds of measurements, anything having to do with engineers versus planning. There is some dovetail there, but we have two guys that do that. We had our GIS guy who was part of the engineering department, AJ Chacon, but he's kind of transferred over to IT, does more software. So that's what we take care of. Now, what we do on any one given day, my first thing I do, I go talk to my boss, Peter Rakowicz, who's been there over 30 years. And I said, Pete, what happened last night? So, was there an accident? Was it on 95? Was there a fire somewhere? Storm? Did something happen that we need direct Department of Public Works involvement with. We're not emergency services, but we help them. We're not the fire department, but we help them. Anything having to do with roads, that kind of thing. So that's number one. Then after, and on top of that, all the projects we're involved with, and they are many.
What are some of those projects that you're working on now?
Oh, this morning I was working on, we have a bridge project upcoming. It's on the border of Fairfield on Old Road. It's Old Road on the Westport side. It's Wakeman Lane on the Fairfield side.
And that bridge that nobody thinks about when they're driving over.
Which a lot of bridges are that way, yeah. And
until you start working on it.
We've been in design with this for several years. We've gotten all our permitting, and we're finally coming to fruition, and construction will be starting this spring. So that's one project. We've got several bridges going on at the same time in various stages of design, permitting, construction, going out to bid, or actually building. We have sidewalk projects. We just finished a sidewalk on Hills Point Road from kind of down by the beach area where the deli is there up to about the railroad.
You've done a lot of sidewalks lately.
Yep. One on Morningside Drive, which they're finishing up, and I think they still have some touch-up to do on there. We just got funding for and finalized some funding for a sidewalk on Easton Road, going literally from that intersection. I might talk about that later, but exit 42, Easton Road, Main Street, and all the way up to Coleytown Road. So it's about 8,000 linear feet of sidewalks. Big project. And we also have a sidewalk project plan on Campo Road South, going from the Post Road intersection all the way down to Bridge Street. There is some sidewalk there now, but it needs to be fixed, and there's some areas where there's no sidewalks. And those are just sidewalks. So we're working on the tide gates and doing maintenance on the tide gates. That's a big project going on. Like I say, I've got 3 or 4 bridges in the turnpike, so to speak. So, yeah.
Everyone wants to know about the Post Road project.
Yes.
It's a state Department of Transportation project.
It is.
But obviously you're involved.
We're involved. We're involved somewhat peripherally, and when there are problems, I actually call their superintendent for that project from the DOT. It was a 3-year project when they started. I don't know if they've gotten delays and time extensions and to what degree. I know, for example, the Thruway project is finishing up, and they should be finishing up shortly. But the Post Road project ran into some delays with utilities. I hate to say it, but construction often runs into delays.
Sure.
So I don't know the day-to-day details there. I tend to get more involved when a Westport resident has an issue and they call us and they say, hey, what's going on out here? Can you help me out? And I mean, anything from the cherry trees at Sakura, it was a whole big thing, to, somebody will call me up on Crescent Road or something and say, hey, what's going on over here? This doesn't quite look right. And I'll go out and take a look at it. I'll call Joe Sorcinelli from the DOT and say, hey, someone called me. He's like, yeah, go ahead, take a look at it. That kind of thing. So I guess I act more as a liaison with that project. That's 2/3 of the way through, so it should be coming closer to fruition. I'm hoping another year, but don't quote me. That's me quoting it. That's not the DOT.
Do you want to talk about the cherry trees at Sakura?
Well, that was they've been there for a while, and it was a whole uproar of what they were doing. They were going to be digging into that, and they didn't want the trees to die, and so we helped them work with the state, with some RTM members and a whole bunch of people, and they were able to come to some kind of compromise. And I'm happy with state projects when I can kind of get them to work together, and I've got problems of my own to work with. So
trees are a big issue in Westport.
They can be, yeah. They can be. And I mean, I love trees. I really do. And I'm a big advocate for planting them everywhere and anywhere. But they don't mix well with traffic. And so sometimes it's better to clear the trees near where your road or sidewalk is and plant them a little further back. Now, trees don't grow in a year, so that's a big problem. So, but we have some beautiful, big sycamores and just other trees around town.
The one on Post Road and Campo South.
Yep.
That has gotten a lot of attention. It's a lot of traffic, a lot of compacted soil, but it's like an icon.
And it's hanging in there. It's doing fine. So I hope it remains. Okay. There's another big sycamore up kind of near Town Hall too that we drive by all the time. So.
And you mentioned residents. They do call?
Oh yeah, all the time. And that's part of our job. Part of our job is to be a liaison with either the projects we're doing, or just the projects that are going on. And it's funny, engineers will pride themselves on, hey, I only took one English class and I don't know how to write and I don't know how to speak. And yet 99% of our job is talking to people and explaining technical stuff in language that anyone can understand. And we have to do that. Actually, it's difficult. We have to get out of our own idiom. And we have to think, how would somebody who doesn't have all the years of schooling we'd had talk about rainfall, talk about roadways, talk about whatever, not dumbing it down so badly that you're belittling the subject, but how do you get the point across? The what do they say, the burden of communication is on the communicator, not on the person you're communicating to, and you got to make sure your message is getting through. And that's not always easy for engineers.
Well, not easy for podcasters either. Do most of the people get it once you talk to them? Do they say, "Oh, I never realized it"?
Yeah, so I'll throw it back in your court. What does "get it" mean, right? Yes, many of them do. Many of them get it, and there are things about our jargon, for want of better words, that I would love to simplify. So most people, when you show that you have the intent to communicate with them, they'll pick up on that and you'll find the words. So they'll hang in there with you and you'll hang in there with them until there's a meeting of the minds. They may not agree with you. And I tell a lot of people this. I say, by the way, I'm going to give you what I know. You may not agree with it, but at least you'll understand it. And they get that. They appreciate that generally. So
you mentioned rainfall.
Yeah.
What's one of those issues that?
Well, one of the things I'll just typically talk about, engineers and hydrologists will talk about a 25-year storm, and a 100-year storm, a 1,000-year storm, and a 2-year storm. And I'm an engineer. I've taken probability classes. I could probably teach probability classes.
Probably.
But probability is one of those crazy subjects that the math is easy, but understanding what it means is not so easy. It'll take you a lifetime to wrap your head around. Like if you flip a coin 99 times and it comes up heads, what's the chance when you flip it that 100th time, it's going to be heads again? Well, it's 50%.
50-50.
But that makes no sense just intuitively, right? So we use terms like 25-year storm, which is a probability. The numbers guys have figured out that's a probability. So I kind of like to do away with that language. And instead of a 2-year storm, I'll talk about 3.5 inches of rain. A 25-year storm, 6.5 inches of rain in 24 hours. Somehow people can get it through their head a lot easier. So can I, quite frankly. I know what 2 inches of rain, 1 inch of rain, 5 inches of rain looks like. So that just makes a little more sense. And actually, when engineers use the term to say 25-year storm, 2-year storm, whatever, we're using it to show matter of degree. So if we say a 25-year storm, it's not a 2-year storm. So we're just using it also as a descriptor. So I try to get out of that language. I can speak that. I can teach it. But what happens is a lot of people hear that language and they say, oh, well, we've had 400-year storms. And we haven't. But so basically, they're taking my jargon and saying, I don't know what I'm talking about. And then a lot of engineers will try to push hard on it. Say, no, let's do away with that. And let's talk about what we know, which is we live in New England and it rains. Sometimes it rains really hard. Sometimes it doesn't. So that's just one. So.
And sometimes the rain comes on areas where trees used to be,
Yep.
and now there's asphalt or concrete.
Yep. Yeah, and can create a lot more runoff.
You should have been an English major. You missed your calling. Talk about accomplishments. What are some of the, as you drive around town, which I'm sure you put a lot of miles.
Oh, yeah.
That you get reimbursed for. And you look around town, what do you see that you're really proud of?
To see the projects we get involved in, it's a strange thing. You have to work for the town for several years before you really start getting to know. Yeah, how are we doing on time? Let me know.
We're good.
Okay.
I love it.
Before you really start knowing it neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood, that takes some time. When people first start working for the town, it takes a little bit and they get a little frustrated. But then after a while, once you've been working here for a while, you get to know neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood what happens. And what I mean by that is what the topography is, how the flooding is, how the development is. And so after you've been here a while, you start realizing the time frame we're on in public works is not necessarily the same time frame that the public is on. We start looking at a sidewalk a couple of years before. It takes some years to plan it. It takes some years to build it. So if we get something done in 3 or 4 or 5 years, that's actually pretty good by our standards. By the public, I get it. They called up on a Thursday. They want a sidewalk, next Monday or something, which I understand. But so when I look around and I see slowly but surely we're doing things, and it's slow increments. But what I love about that is, like I say, I've got 3 or 4 bridges now that we're planning, and I know those are going to come. And 3 years is going to be here, and then we're going to see those come to fruition. And when we go to public meetings and we talk about things, and again, people are rightfully kind of up in arms over whatever issue, but I know we're planning it, and it's going to take time. So it's kind of like the football's in the air. I know I'm going to be in the end zone at some point, and I'll be able to catch it when I get there. And I'm starting to see a whole lot of projects come to that. The sidewalks, the roads, other things. I was talking about that intersection, the one at exit 42 on the Merritt Parkway and Main Street and Weston Road. And the state is in the process now. They've been looking at that for, I think, 25 years.
I was going to say decades.
Yeah. And it finally came to fruition where they're going to do some things. It's not going to be roundabouts like they originally wanted to do, but they wanted to see if they had a potential project. They had some public information meetings. They do. It's now in design. It's been there for 2 years, so we should actually hear from them shortly to say, oh, they've actually got a viable project, which means 5 years later it'll get built. 5 years sounds like a long time, but I know, again, in the time frame I'm talking about, which is public works, you put it in the process now because 5 years later it'll be done. And I'm starting to see a whole lot of this. I started with the town in 2014, so I've been here about almost 11 years, and I'm starting to see some of that.
But there's also, I would imagine, you mentioned these bridge projects that once they're finished, they sort of look the same as they did before. And, people say, well, why did they spend 3 years with cones and detours?
That actually is a beautiful thing to me. If the bridge can blend back into the background to the point where no one even notices, and I'll tell you why. I'll use Bayberry Lane Bridge as an example. I was getting 20 to 25 calls a day. And it got carried over through the winter because of utilities, a whole lot of reasons why. So I was getting a whole lot of phone calls from people. Most of those calls were from Weston, by the way, because they come down that way. When that bridge got finished, I've gotten 0 calls on that. To me, that's beautiful. That bridge has a nice, sleek guardrail. If you drive over it, guaranteed a lot of people don't even know there's a bridge there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. Infrastructure by its nature is kind of not very sexy. You don't think about it. Even the parking lot where I live in the condo association, nobody wants to spend money on a parking lot. They want the pizzazz things. I get that. But infrastructure is so important. And when you can put it in and kind of like nobody knows it, but you know it, that's a good feeling.
So I would imagine you are really excited by a sewer that works.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
You mentioned neighborhoods.
Yeah.
You have a favorite Westport neighborhood?
Oh, I don't know if I would say that. There's just different neighborhoods, and you get to know the character of different neighborhoods in different ways. You get to know who lives where. And I'm jealous, quite frankly. I've been here a little more than 10 years, 11 years. But the people in my office who have worked here for 30 years, and Brian Thompson and I will talk about, oh, this house. And yeah, the guy lives behind there. And before him, it was somebody else. And I'm not even talking, the big names. It's not Paul Newman but it's just knowing a neighborhood and who lived there. And I'm also a land surveyor, so I understand this a little bit. You get to know the details of a road or a property to the point where, like, you'll meet someone on vacation and say, oh, you're from Norwalk. Well, yeah, I live in a certain area. And he's, oh, yeah, I live there too. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's that greenhouse on the corner. It's got a stone wall and there's this there and there's that. And they look at you like, are you creepy or what? But we really do. We get so that we know the land all over the place so well that that's almost scary to some people.
So do you look at Westport with different eyes than I would?
I would say so. Again, that's just my kind of conditioning and my bias in terms of how I take things in, whereas yours would be acclimated to how you look at things.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I can't help but look at things as a surveyor. My wife and I, we went to Japan not this past October, a year ago, and we're going around and I'm noticing survey markers in the middle of Japan, and I took pictures of some of them, for God's sakes. And so, I mean, it's kind of in your blood. I mean, I looked at all the other really nice things too, so don't get me wrong.
Right.
But yeah. So,
wow.
But there's a lot of nice neighborhoods and very different flavors in different neighborhoods.
So you work, I wrote this, you work with a lot of different departments and boards. I mentioned planning and zoning, conservation, building, select women's, police, fire, health. Are there differences in the way you deal with each of these, or is dealing with a board pretty much the same across the board?
No, definitely not. And again, one of the things that's kind of a wonderful approach is working with, I'll joke sometimes about engineers. We tend to be very focused. And the best thing that you can do is for a moment stop and recognize, wow, there are a whole lot of people who don't take in the world the way I do, that they think very differently. And I'll use a really good example we're involved in. First Select Woman Jennifer Tooker started a traffic and pedestrian safety force, and it's me and Pete from Public Works, it's Nick Marsan from the fire departments, it's Deputy Chief Ryan Paulson and Al DeMera from the police department, Tom Kiley from the First Select Woman's office, and Eileen Francis is there as well. And so we look at problems differently. So sometimes when we've come to the public meetings, I think you were at some of the public meetings, and they give us their input, and then we digest it through very different lenses. And sometimes the viewpoints are so different, and it's very good to consider things in a way that's not just an engineer. And I think that's extremely rewarding. And I think it's necessary especially we're going to bring all our skills as engineers and surveyors to bear, just like the police are going to do their police thing and the fire is going to do their thing, right? But it's just very helpful to work with and amongst other boards to remind you, hey, there's more than one way to look at something. So
you've been here 14 years.
Yeah.
You talked a bit about the changes, the physical changes in Westport. Has Westport changed in other ways?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't say any more or less than anywhere else. Certainly society in general has changed, especially in the last few years, it seems, politically and otherwise. But is that just Westport? I don't know. I would tend to think no. But Westport is absolutely a vibrant community and an outspoken community. And again, that's a good thing. It can be an extremely difficult thing, but as I always say, I would rather, if we're talking and we disagree, I'd rather you tell me, hey, I don't like your idea and here's why. And we have a good enough relationship that we can withstand that. And then maybe you have something to add to my idea, or maybe you like my idea, or maybe somewhere between the two ideas we find something. But I'll tell other engineers all the time, for example, I'll say, think like an engineer. You think I'm saying no to you. Well, right now I am. Think like an engineer, make a case, come talk to me. I'll always listen to you. And then we'll make a decision from there. And I think that's a fair way to be, and that way at least I'm not so stuck on one kind of way of doing things. Sure. But at the same time, I want you to do your homework, and let's have a little tug of war while we're trying to hash it out. Sure. I think that's necessary. I think that's a good thing. Some spirited debate is always good.
And this is a town filled with spirited debaters.
That is an understatement.
Just a couple more. This is great. I'm learning a lot. You would not tell me your favorite neighborhood, but what's a hidden gem in Westport that most people probably don't know about?
I like to occasionally drop by Berrien Hill Beach. There's a lot of little places all over the place. That's one of the things that surprises me about Westport all the time. This is not quite on your question, but one of the things that kind of really always tickles me and charms me, I'll have to do land records research to find out where a boundary is, to find out where the property line, where's town properties start and end. And so I'll have to dig into who owned it before that, and go backwards to when it was a big parcel. And one of them I remember, it was north of by Coleytown Road. And someone ended up, I stumbled upon a map of this person that owned, I want to say about 50 acres from Lions Plains Road, literally all the way over to Bayberry Lane. It turns out to be a person by the name of James Earl Fraser. Fraser Lane is named after him. Yeah. Turns out he's an artist. I'm not a big art major person or whatever, but I happen to know he did the sculpture of the Native American all slumped over with the spear. I think it's called The End of the Trail or something like that. The imagery has been used everywhere. If you look it up on Google, you'll see it. You'll know the imagery.
It's on the Buffalo nickel.
So, and he did the 5-cent nickel before our Jeffersonian nickel, right? And his wife did artwork too. She was a sculptor. I think she did a piece that's in Weston Town Hall. And when I'm doing this land records research, it's like all of a sudden the historical pops through because I'm back looking at the current owner. And yet it's the very lines that we're looking at are, it's now subdivided and there's Fraser Lane and there's a whole lot of people owning it, not just one. And that just tickles me. And I have so many of those stories where I'm doing a land records research and did one on Beachside Avenue. And then, I'm going back in owners, and the owner of record is a James Cash Penny. Yes, J.C. Penney.
Yep.
Little small things. These are not big presidential kind of history, but moments of history that kind of jump out. But they're not history because they're present. I did one not that long ago on Saugatuck Avenue, down by where Duck Pond is in that area. And the gentleman who owned a big estate down there, J. Anthony Probst, and he apparently... He helped Woodrow Wilson get into office, and then afterwards he made a fortune selling clocks. If you look up the self-winding clock company, you'll see a picture of the round clock in Grand Central. And he made a fortune. And that sounds like, oh, great, Keith. That's old history. Why are we worried about this? But he had some children. He had a daughter, Barbara Probst Solomon, who I think just recently passed away. And I think you did a write-up on her or whatever. And so, I'm doing the searches. And
she's the one who talked about F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Okay.
And his Great Gatsby connection. So it's all connected.
Yeah.
Last question. Yeah.
I love those moments, but that's kind of what I want. That's why what made me think of when you said like neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I love when a neighborhood there'll be an intersection of the historical with the current.
And you bring it to life.
Yeah.
So last question.
Sure.
What's under the radar for you and your department? What are we not talking about now that we will be?
Well, we're still working on a number of projects, obviously. The Tide Gate is one that we're working on. Parker Harding is a whole bit. They've been working on that, right? It's been an issue for 40 years, and we're working really hard. Jen Tucker took that on, and boy, we're really working hard to try to get something there. It needs it. And we'll come to an agreement at some point. We're still working on it. But bridges all over the place and, a whole lot of things. Flooding is a big thing. We had a whole bunch of flooding meetings. Our offices, I always like to tell people, our office is always open. We're very busy. We might have to tell you to come back, but come by and talk to us about any problem you have, and we'll give you our engineering 2 cents worth on it. So it'll probably be more than 2 cents, though. I guarantee that.
Keith Wilberg, town engineer, who has enlightened us. I don't think anyone who has watched this podcast will ever drive around town and see it the same way again. So, Keith, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It was great.
Thanks.